We begin today by exploring the architecture of reconciliation, a profound journey into how Nelson Mandela masterfully engineered what is known as the Rainbow Nation. Our focus is on South Africa's extraordinary transition from the oppressive system of apartheid to a vibrant democracy. At the heart of this transformation stood Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, the undisputed lead architect. His groundbreaking methodology was built on three core pillars: restorative justice, symbolic integration, and structural truth. This was not merely a political shift, but a profound rebuilding of a nation from its very foundations. To understand this remarkable transformation, we must first look at the crucible of Mandela's experience, 27 arduous years spent on Robben Island from 1964 to 1990. The inputs of this period were incredibly harsh forced labour in a limestone quarry that damaged his tear ducts and caused cataracts, a debilitating bout with tuberculosis in 1988, and extreme isolation coupled with nutritional deprivation. Yet, these brutal inputs were not processed into bitterness or despair. Instead, they fed into a powerful processing engine, yielding a remarkable output, a readied leader. Mandela emerged having eradicated any desire for vengeance, having cultivated masterful strategic patience, and as a leader uniquely capable of forgiving the unforgivable. This profound shift was forged through practices like using boxing not for aggression, but to release tension and preserve tranquility, and reframing hard labor as precious time spent outdoors in nature. This mental and emotional processing turned extreme hardship into the very foundations of his future leadership. A critical moment in this architecture of reconciliation was the pragmatic compromise of the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize. This period was fraught with the very real threat of civil war, internal resistance against sharing the award with F.W. de Klerk was fierce. As ANC hardliner Tokyo Sexwell put it, our family and friends were killed. How could we reconcile with them? We told Mandela there was no need to receive the award with the person who imprisoned him. Yet Mandela made a strategic choice, guided by the principle that you negotiate with your enemy, not your friend. Sharing the stage with de Klerk proved to white South Africans that reconciliation meant mutual existence, not retribution. This act of symbolic unity was crucial in averting widespread conflict. The inaugural covenant, delivered on May 10, 1994, laid out the foundational blueprint for the new South Africa. Its foundation was a profound acknowledgement of the apartheid crucible, recognizing the extraordinary human disaster that had lasted too long. The framework it articulated was the Rainbow Nation mandate, envisioning a society where all South Africans, both black and white, could walk tall, free of fear, assured of their inalienable right to human dignity, and at peace with themselves and the world. The core mechanism to achieve this was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, setting the stage for restorative justice. And the capstone, the ultimate guarantee, was a powerful promise. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. Mandela's vision for change can be distilled into a 5-stage model, an architecture of change. First, acknowledge reality, exposing the problem without hiding the brutal facts. Second, foster public discourse or engagement, bringing diverse stakeholders and even sworn enemies into dialogue. Third, implement symbolic action or activation, executing highly visible, emotionally resonant actions to shift national sentiment. A prime example being the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Fourth, focus on institutionalization or structure, building formal mechanisms to sustain the change, such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Finally, ensure sustainability or legacy, establishing a culture that outlasts the individual leader. This comprehensive model allowed for a phased, yet profound transformation. At the crossroads of justice, South Africa faced a fundamental question: why choose restorative justice? Traditional retributive justice, akin to Nuremberg-style criminal trials, focuses on punishment and establishing objective guilt, where the primary relationship is the state versus the offender, enforced through legal prosecution and imprisonment. However, South Africa opted for restorative justice, exemplified by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This model's core focus was healing, correcting imbalances, and restoring broken relationships, shifting the primary relationship to the victim versus the offender. Its mechanism involved public acknowledgement of truth in exchange for amnesty. This wasn't merely a moral choice, it was a strategic imperative. Restorative justice was seen as the only viable mechanism to prevent an ongoing civil war and create a path forward for the nation. Pillar one of this architectural process was symbolic reconciliation, dramatically illustrated by the Invictus activation curve. In the early 1990s, the baseline was extreme racial division, with black South Africans historically cheering against the Springboks rugby team as an anti-apartheid stance. Yet, by June 24, 1995, a remarkable shift occurred. The action was iconic. Mandela walked onto the pitch wearing the green Springbok jersey and personally handed the trophy to Afrikaner captain Francois Pienaar. The result was instantaneous and profound. White crowds chanted "Nelson, Nelson," and black citizens celebrated a white team. The concept of the Rainbow Nation was emotionally validated on a massive scale, proving its power before it was even structurally realized. Sports, in this moment, truly became a universal language of unity. Pillar 2 was structural reconciliation, primarily embodied by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. Its lead architect was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC aimed for three key forms of reconciliation with painful truths through honest testimony, reconciliation between victims and perpetrators, and broader societal reconciliation to overcome deep-seated racial differences. The core function of the TRC was uniquely powerful. It was fitted with the juridical authority to grant amnesty in exchange for full, public testimony of politically motivated crimes. This entire endeavor was grounded in the moral foundation of Ubuntu, the African philosophy encapsulated by the phrase, "I am human only because you are human," prioritizing community harmony over individual retribution. Delving into the mechanics of the TRC, we see a fascinating contrast between the ideal and the reality. Ideally, the TRC promised therapeutic catharsis, a process where victim narrative would lead to public acknowledgement, restoring dignity, and culminating in catharsis and healing. This was rooted in Christian ethics, viewing forgiveness as a holy gift. However, the reality often diverged, manifesting as bureaucratic archiving. The TRC effectively became a theatrical performance where raw testimony was subjected to forensic verification, pain was quantified, and placed into humanitarian law categories. This process, heavily shaped by media coverage, effectively commodified archived memory for the sake of nation-building, sometimes replacing subjective truth with administrative imperatives. This approach to reconciliation generated significant academic critique, specifically regarding the burden of forgiveness. The paradox was stark. The TRC subordinated individual justice to the political goal of national reconciliation. While aiming for national unity and state transition, this approach often created victims of reconciliation. These were individuals marginalized for demanding justice rather than therapeutic healing. A study by the Trauma Center for Victims of Violence and Torture in Cape Town found that 60% of victims expressed an increased sense of unease and distress after giving testimony. This highlights the profound tension when a state-building exercise implicitly demands individual forgiveness, placing an immense asymmetrical burden on those who suffered most. This discussion leads us to a fundamental philosophical divide, the distinction between state amnesty and pure forgiveness. Jacques Derrida, grappling with the aporia, argued that pure forgiveness is a logical impossibility, belonging to the realm of the impossible, because one can only truly forgive the unforgivable. His critique was that the moment forgiveness is used as a political tool or an economic exchange for state normalization, it ceases to be true forgiveness, stating, "Forgiveness is mad, and it should remain in the madness of the impossible." In contrast, Jean Amery, with his morality of resentment, argued that resentment is a valid moral sentiment that leads to legitimate claims for justice. He critiqued the idea that overcoming legitimate grudges simply for social harmony forces victims to become martyrs for the state, declaring, "Politically, I do not want to hear anything of forgiveness." The human cost of these hearings brought this philosophical divide into sharp relief, exposing the tension between the state's expectations and the victim's reality. Nelson Mandela, representing the state's perspective, declared that personal bitterness is irrelevant. It is a luxury that we, as individuals and as a country, simply cannot afford. However, for many victims, this sentiment translated into the silencing of grief. As Kalukwe Mawila, a TRC interviewee, powerfully articulated, "The oppression was bad, but what is much worse, what makes me even more angry, is that they are trying to dictate my forgiveness." The TRC hearings, while aiming for healing, inadvertently structured an environment where any expression of a desire for revenge or retributive justice was condemned as an obstacle to healing, effectively marginalizing alternative narratives of trauma and imposing a particular narrative of forgiveness. In synthesis, South Africa's transition can be described as a flawed but necessary miracle. Mandela's genius was not in creating a perfect, pain-free transition, but in engineering a functioning state out of an impossible dilemma where truth, in essence, replaced justice to prevent mutual destruction. This process relied on three critical elements. First, the symbols built the emotion. The 1995 Rugby World Cup, symbolized by the Springbok, bought the fragile nation invaluable time, psychological safety, and goodwill. Second, the structure built the transition. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, provided a bureaucratic mechanism to bypass an impending civil war. And third, the flaw absorbed the shock. The burden of injustice was tragically transferred from the state apparatus directly onto individual victims, a highly criticized yet politically necessary calculus that allowed the nation to move forward. From this extraordinary case, we can extract key leadership takeaways for engineering sustainable change. First, negotiate with the enemy. Real progress requires engaging directly with those who oppose you and hold opposing worldviews, not just aligning with your friends and echo chambers. Second, utilize symbolic activation. Culture changes faster through resonant, emotional, and symbolic actions, like wearing the opposing team's jersey, than through policy papers alone. Third, design for the future, not survival. Decisions must be anchored in the ultimate architectural goal, such as the Rainbow Nation, circumventing the immediate desire for vindication or retributive satisfaction. And finally, acknowledge the pain of compromise. Understand that massive institutional transitions are rarely win-win. They often require key stakeholders to bear an unfair, asymmetrical burden of the change. Nelson Mandela famously said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And in South Africa, he proved this profound truth. This was the architecture of reconciliation,